At the age of 16, Kyle's parents left her for new families, leaving her alone in a small Texas town. 10 years later, when her grandfather left her $2 million, they suddenly returned, begging for help. But Kyle knew it wasn't love, it was greed. Can he protect his future from those who betrayed him? The air in the small dining room of their modest Abilene, Texas, home felt heavier than usual that night. Kyle Mathison, a wiry 16-year-old with a mop of sandy hair and a quiet demeanor, sat across from his parents, Linda and Rick, picking at a plate of lukewarm meatloaf. The ceiling fan creaked lazily above them, cutting through the silence that had settled like dust after a long day. He'd spent the afternoon shooting hoops in the driveway, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Then, without warning, his world tilted. "We got something to tell you, bud," Rick started, his voice steady but distant, like he was reading a script. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, avoiding Kyle's eyes. Linda, perched beside him, fidgeted with her napkin, her lips pressed into a thin line. Kyle glanced between them, waiting for the punchline. Maybe they'd finally bought that old pickup truck Rick had been eyeing. Or maybe they were planning a surprise trip to Six Flags. Instead, Linda spoke. "We're getting divorced," she said, her tone flat, like she was announcing the weather. "We've both found other people we love. It's better this way." Kyle froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The meatloaf plopped back onto his plate with a soft thud. Divorce? The word didn't even fit. His friends with divorced parents talked about screaming matches, slammed doors, and months of tension. But Rick and Linda? They'd been fine. Just last week, they'd laughed over a dumb reality show, Rick teasing Linda about her terrible taste in contestants. No fights, no signs, nothing. He blinked at them, half expecting a gotcha to follow. It never came. "We worked it all out," Rick added, leaning forward now, hands clasped like he was sealing a business deal. "Your mom's moving in with Greg. He's at a place across town. And Stacy, my girlfriend, she's moving here with us. We'll do joint custody. We're only 3 miles apart, so you'll switch houses every week." Easy. Easy? Kyle's chest tightened. His parents weren't just splitting, they were dismantling his entire life, piece by piece, and acting like it was no big deal. He wanted to scream, to demand why they hadn't warned him, why they'd let him think everything was okay. But his throat locked up, and all he could do was stare at the chipped table edge, tracing its cracks with his eyes. "We'll make sure you're still our priority," Linda chimed in, her voice softening as if she'd rehearsed this part. "You'll get the new PlayStation you wanted. Maybe a trip somewhere cool. Whatever you need, okay?" She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, the chair scraping against the linoleum. "I don't want a PlayStation," he muttered, barely audible. "I just want us to stay together." His voice cracked, and he hated it. Hated how small he sounded, how powerless he felt. But they didn't hear him, not really. They were already moving on, their promises ringing hollow. The next few days blurred into a nightmare. Linda packed her bags, her new boyfriend's truck idling in the driveway as she hauled out boxes. Stacy rolled in the day after, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar, unloading suitcases into the master bedroom Kyle's parents had once shared. He watched from his room as she rearranged the furniture, turning his home into something he didn't recognize. Down the hall, Rick clapped Stacy's twin boys, 2 loud, sneering kids his age, on the shoulders, welcoming them like they were the sons he'd always wanted. At Linda's new place, things weren't much better. Greg, a burly guy with a forced smile, tried to play nice, but the air was thick with tension. Linda was already talking about starting a family with him, her attention drifting away from Kyle like he was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. The joint custody plan started off as promised. 1 week with Rick, 1 with Linda, but didn't take long for cracks to show. They'd forget whose turn it was, leaving Kyle stranded, texting each other excuses while he sat alone with a backpack and a sinking feeling. Then came Aunt Emma. At 55, she was Rick's older sister, a no-nonsense widow who lived alone in a rambling house on the edge of town, surrounded by her sprawling flower nursery. She'd always been Kyle's favorite, tough but warm, with a dry laugh and a knack for making him feel seen. We showed up on her porch one rainy afternoon. Soaked and miserable after another forgotten handoff, she didn't ask questions. She just handed him a towel and a mug of hot cocoa. "Stay as long as you need," she said, her voice firm but kind. "This is your home now if you want it." Kyle nodded, tears stinging his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. But as he settled into Emma's guest room, unpacking his duffel bag. A question gnawed at him. Why had his parents let him go so easily? Was he that easy to forget? The answer, he'd soon learn, was more painful than he could have imagined, and it would set the stage for a fight he never saw coming. The scent of damp soil and blooming jasmine filled the air at Aunt Emma's place, a sprawling single-story house on the outskirts of Abilene, Texas. For 16-year-old Kyle Mathison, it was a refuge from the chaos of his parents' unraveling lives. Emma, a sturdy woman with gray-streaked hair and hands roughened by years of tending her flower nursery, didn't coddle him. She handed him a pair of work gloves the day after he moved in, pointing to a row of potted azaleas. "If you're staying, you're helping," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but laced with warmth. Kyle didn't mind. The work, hauling soil, trimming stems, watering rows of plants, gave him something to grip onto when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Life with Emma settled into a quiet rhythm. After school, he'd bike the 2 miles from Abilene High to her place, trading his backpack for a shovel. She paid him a small wage, enough for gas money and the occasional burger at the Dairy Queen on South First Street. "I don't want to be a burden," he'd told her once, cheeks burning with embarrassment. She just snorted, ruffling his hair. "You're not on my neck, kid. You're family." Her words stuck with him, a lifeline in a sea of rejection. But the sting of his parents' abandonment never dulled. Rick and Linda had promised joint custody, but weeks turned into months, and their calls grew sporadic. Birthdays passed with nothing but a belated text, if that. One time, Emma had to remind Rick it was Kyle's 17th, and he'd mumbled an excuse about being swamped before sending a $20 Venmo with a buy-yourself-something-nice note. Linda didn't even bother. Kyle stopped expecting anything, burying his hurt under layers of soil and sweat at the nursery. Emma's house became his sanctuary. They'd sit on her creaky porch swing after dinner, sipping sweet tea while she told stories about her late husband, Tom, a trucker who died in a wreck when Kyle was a toddler. She never remarried, claiming her plants and her niece, Kyle's cousin, Sarah, now a cardiologist in Austin, were enough. Kyle liked the simplicity of it. No drama. No new step siblings sneering at him like Rick's girlfriend Stacy's twins did. No awkward silences like the ones at Linda's with Greg. Emma didn't promise him video games or trips. She gave him something better, stability. Still, the questions gnawed at him. Why had his parents let him fade from their lives so easily? He'd overhear Emma on the phone with Rick sometimes, her voice sharp. "He's your son, not a library book you can check out when it's convenient." Rick would mutter apologies, send a check for a few months, then forget again. Linda didn't even pretend to care anymore, too wrapped up in her new life. Kyle tried to shrug it off, but the rejection festered. Then came the day that cracked it all open. It was a muggy Saturday in June, a year after he'd moved in with Emma. Kyle was at the nursery, unloading a delivery of mulch, when his phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from Rick, rare enough to make him pause. He wiped sweat from his brow and hit play, expecting another half-hearted, "How you doing?" Instead, Rick's voice was low, irritated, like he hadn't meant to be overheard. "Stacy's on my case about the mortgage again," he grumbled. "If Kyle wasn't such a drag on our plans, we could have sold that stuff ages ago." "Whatever. She'll figure it out." Kyle's stomach dropped. He replayed it, heart-pounding. "Stuff? What stuff?" A memory flashed, his old basketball hoop, the one he'd begged Rick to keep, gone from the garage last time he'd visited. His comic book collection, too, the one he'd spent years building. He'd assumed they'd been tossed in the move. But sold? He bolted inside, finding Emma pruning roses by the kitchen window. "Did Dad sell my things?" he blurted, voice shaking. She froze, shears clattering to the counter. Her silence said it all. After a beat, she sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't want you to know," she admitted. "A few months back, Rick asked if I needed anything from your old room. Said he was clearing space. I told him to keep it for you, but I heard from a neighbor he had a garage sale. Your hoop, your book's gone." The betrayal hit like a punch. His parents hadn't just forgotten him. They'd erased him, cashed out his childhood to fund their new lives. Kyle sank into a chair, head in his hands. "Why didn't they ask me?" he whispered. Emma knelt beside him, her voice steady but fierce. "Because they're selfish, Kyle. Always have been. But you've got me, and I'm not letting you go." That night, lying in bed, Kyle made a decision. He was done waiting for Rick and Linda to care. He'd build his own life, with Emma's help, and leave them behind. But as he drifted to sleep, a flicker of doubt lingered. Was he too harsh, cutting them off completely? Or was this just the start of a bigger fight, one he didn't even know was coming? The answer would hit him years later, when a windfall and a knock on his door would turn everything upside down. The years rolled by like the flat Texas plains outside Abilene, steady and unyielding. By 26, Kyle Mathison had carved out a life he could call his own. He'd graduated from Texas Tech with a degree in computer science, fueled by late nights coding and early mornings at Anima's nursery. Now, he was back in Abilene, renting a small apartment near downtown, working remote gigs while dreaming of launching an IT startup, something to help small businesses thrive in a digital world. Emma, still as Rocket 65, cheered him on, her flower business blooming as steadily as her pride in him. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a crisp October morning, the kind where the air smelled of hay and promise. Kyle was sipping coffee at his kitchen counter when his phone lit up with Emma's name. Her voice trembled on the other end, a rare crack in her usual steel. "It's Grandpa Jack," she said. "He's gone. Passed last night in his sleep." Kyle's heart sank. Jack, Rick's father, had been a gruff old farmer with a soft spot for Kyle and Emma. They'd spent summers at a sprawling ranch an hour east, fixing fences and feeding cattle, Jack's raspy laugh echoing over the fields. Rick and his brothers rarely visited, too busy with their own lives, but Kyle and Emma had been there, especially in Jack's final years when cancer whittled him down. The funeral was a quiet affair, just a handful of locals and family at the dusty cemetery near Jack's ranch. Rick showed up, late and disheveled, with Stacy in tow. Linda arrived solo, her eyes red but distant. Kyle stood beside Emma, jaw tight, avoiding their glances. After the service, the siblings, Rick, Emma, and their two brothers, piled into a lawyer's office in town, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights. Kyle tagged along, more for Emma than curiosity. He figured Jack's estate, 60 acres, a weathered farmhouse, and some savings would go to his kids. He was wrong. The lawyer, a wiry man with a thick drawl, slid a document across the table. "Jack left it all to Emma," he said. "The land, the house, and $2 million in cash and bonds. Rest goes to the local veterans charity." A stunned silence gripped the room. Rick's face flushed red, his brothers shifting uncomfortably. Linda, there is an ex-daughter-in-law, stared blankly. Emma blinked, hands trembling as she gripped the paper. "Me?" she whispered. The lawyer nodded. "He said you're the only one who showed up when it mattered." Kyle's chest swelled with pride and relief. Jack had seen what he'd seen. Emma was the heart of the family, the one who'd cared for him when the others couldn't be bothered. Rick sputtered, "This can't be right." Dad wouldn't, but the lawyer cut him off. "It's ironclad. He updated it last year, and we witnessed it while Emma was nursing him." The room erupted in murmurs, but Kyle stayed quiet, watching his parents' masks slip. They hadn't come for Jack. They'd come for a payout. A week later, Emma called Kyle to her house. She sat him down at her kitchen table, a check for $2 million between them. "This is yours," she said, her voice firm but eyes soft. "Jack wanted family taken care of, and you're mine. Use it for that startup you're always talking about. Make something of yourself." Kyle's throat tightened. He tried to protest. "You need this, not me," but she waved him off. "I've got the nursery, the land. I'm set. You're my kid, Kyle, even if I didn't birth you. Take it." He hugged her, tears spilling over, overwhelmed by her faith in him. For the first time, he felt like he could outrun his past. But the past wasn't done with him. 2 days later, his phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in years. Rick's. "Hey, bud," his dad's voice crackled, too cheerful, too forced. "Heard about Grandpa's will." "Wow, huh? Listen, I'm proud of you, staying close to Emma. How about we grab dinner? Catch up." Kudas gut twistet. Hours later, Linda called, her tone syrupy. "Sweetie, I miss you. Let's talk. Maybe I can visit? I hear you're doing big things." He hung up on both, hands shaking. They didn't know Emma had given him the money. Not yet, but the timing reeked of desperation. Then the hammer dropped. Rick showed up unannounced at Kyle's apartment, banging on the door in faded jeans and a stained ball cap. "We need to talk," he said, barging in when Kyle reluctantly opened it. "I'm in a bind, son. Mortgage is killing me. Stacy's boys need college funds. You got that cash now, right? Family helps family." Before Kyle could respond, Linda texted, "Your half-sister needs private school. You're her big brother. Step up." The audacity hit him like a freight train. They'd ignored him for a decade, sold his childhood, And now they wanted his future too? Kyle stared at Rick, anger simmering. You think I owe you? He snapped. Rick flinched, then softened. I just thought, we're still your parents. Kyle pointed to the door. Get out. Rick left, muttering apologies, but the damage was done. That night, alone with his thoughts, Kyle wondered, were they desperate enough to push harder? Or was this just the opening shot in a war he'd have to fight? He didn't know it yet, but the real battle was about to begin. The fluorescent lights of Kyle Mathison's cramped Abilene apartment buzzed faintly as he paced the living room, the $2 million check from Aunt Emma still tucked in a drawer. At 26, he'd imagined this windfall as a launch pad, his IT startup, a team, a future. But now, with his parents circling like vultures, it felt more like a target on his back. Rick's uninvited visit and Linda's shameless text had lit a fuse in him, a mix of fury and disbelief. They'd abandoned him at 16, sold his childhood for pocket change, and now they thought they could waltz back in for a payday? Not if he could help it. The next move came faster than he'd expected. His phone rang, a local number he didn't recognize. Mr. Mathison, a gruff voice barked. This is Lone Star Collections. Your father, Rick Mathison, owes $180,000 on his mortgage. He listed you as a contact. We need payment, or we're escalating. Kyle's pulse spiked. I'm not responsible for his debts, he shot back, voice tight. The guy chuckled, cold and practiced. He said you'd cover it. Family, right? We'll call again. The line went dead, leaving Kyle staring at the screen, a knot of panic twisting in his gut. Rick had dragged him into this mess without a shred of consent. That night, he barely slept, replaying the call. Were they bluffing? Could they force him to pay? He needed answers. The next morning, he called his old college buddy, Nate, a law student finishing his final year at UT Austin. Over a crackling Zoom call, Nate's face popped up, bleary-eyed but sharp. Dude, chill, he said after Kyle explained. Legally, you're in the clear. You didn't sign for that loan. Rick did. Collectors can hassle anyone they want, but you're not obligated unless you cave. Tell him to pound sand. Kyle exhaled, relief washing over him. So why they call me? Nate grinned. They're fishing. If you panic and pay, they win. Just document everything, calls, texts. Could be useful. Useful how? Kyle didn't know yet, but Nate's advice lit a spark. He wasn't just going to sit there and take it. He'd fight back, smart and legal. Step 1, confront the source. He texted Rick, call off your debt collectors. I'm not paying a dime. Rick's reply came hours later, a rambling voice memo. Son, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for this. Stacy's freaking out. Banks threatening foreclosure. I just need a little help. Kyle deleted it mid-sentence, jaw clenched. Sorry didn't cut it anymore. Then Linda upped the ante. She left a voicemail, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Kyle, honey, let's have dinner. Just us three. You, me, your dad. Like old times. We can sort this out. Old times? The phrase made his skin crawl. He almost ignored it, but a hunch told him to play along. If they wanted to push, he'd push harder and get proof. He agreed, picking a diner off Highway 83, a public spot where he could stay in control. The dinner was a circus of manipulation. Rick, slouched in a booth with a forced grin, started with flattery. You're doing great, bud. Tech stuff, huh? Proud of you. Linda chimed in, twirling her straw. We've missed you, sweetie. Family's everything. Kyle nodded, sipping his Coke, phone discreetly recording in his pocket. A trick he'd picked up from a true crime podcast. Then it came. Rick leaned in, voice low. Look, that money Emma gave you, it's a lot, right? I'm drowning here. Just a loan, I swear. Linda jumped in. In your sister's school, $20,000 a year. She's counting on you. Kyle kept his face neutral, letting them dig. You mean the sister I've never met? He said coolly. Linda faltered, then pressed. She's blood, Kyle. And Rick's mortgage. We're talking family survival. He leaned back, recording every word. So you only care now because I've got cash? Rick stammered, No, it's not like that. But Linda snapped, don't be selfish. We raised you. The mask was off, and Kyle had it all on tape. He stood, tossing a 10 on the table. I'm done. You'll get nothing. Walking out, he felt a pang of guilt. Could he have helped? Just a little? But the recording, raw and unfiltered, crushed that doubt. They didn't want him. They wanted his bank account. Back home, he emailed it to Nate. Can this stop them? Nate's reply was quick. Oh, hell yeah. Leverage. The collectors called again the next day, more aggressive. Pay up, or we'll lien your assets, the guy growled. Kyle smirked, Nate's words echoing. I don't know you squat. harassed me again, and I've got a lawyer ready to sue for illegal pressure. Check your records. Rick's the debtor, not me. A long pause, then a mumbled, we'll review it. Click. Victory, small but sweet. But the real test loomed. Rick and Linda wouldn't quit. They'd escalate, guilt trip, maybe even lie. Kyle clutched the check in his drawer, his startup dream within reach. Could he protect it, or would they wear him down? He didn't know it yet, but the fight was about to turn in his favor, and justice was closer than he thought. Kyle Mathison stood at the edge of his new office, a modest loft above a coffee shop in downtown Abilene, Texas. At 26, he turned Grandpa Jack's $2 million inheritance, gifted by Aunt Emma, into something real. PrairieTech, an IT startup helping local businesses go digital. The space smelled of fresh paint and ambition, with a handful of desks buzzing as his small team typed away. It was early December, the air outside crisp with a rare Texas chill, and Kyle felt lighter than he had in years. He'd fought for this, against his parents' greed, against doubt, and he'd won. But the final pieces of that victory were still falling into place. After the diner showdown, Rick and Linda didn't back off easily. Linda sent a barrage of texts, each more desperate. You're breaking my heart, Kyle. We're family. Rick called, slurring through a late-night plea. I messed up, son. Give me a chance. Kyle's finger hovered over the block button, guilt gnawing at him. Could he spare a few grand? Ease their mess? But the recording from the diner, Rick's just alone, and Linda's don't be selfish, played in his mind like a warning siren. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a bailout. He hit block, silencing them for good. The debt collectors were another beast. They called twice more after his pushback, each time less cocky. Kyle, armed with Nate's advice, filed a complaint with the Texas Attorney General's office, attaching call logs and a scathing letter about their harassment of a non-debtor. Within a week, an email landed. Lone Star Collections has ceased contact per your request. Case under review. Nate, now his unofficial legal guru, laughed over the phone. Told you, man. They're scared of a paper trail. You're free. Free. The word tasted like the sweet tea Emma used to make. But freedom came with a cost. Word spread fast in Abilene's tight-knit circles. Rick's foreclosure hit the local paper, Mathison family home auctioned, and Linda's new husband, Greg, lost his job, leaving her scrambling. Kyle heard whispers at the gas station. Rick drinking too much, Linda begging relatives for cash. Part of him ached. There were still his parents, flawed as they were. Yet the ache faded when he remembered the garage sale, the years of silence, the way they'd sold him out. They'd built their own mess. He wouldn't clean it up. Emma, ever the anchor, saw it differently. Over coffee at her nursery one Sunday, she set down her mug, eyes steady. You don't owe them hate, Kyle, but you don't owe them your life either. Jack gave you that money for a reason. Use it right. Her words clicked. He'd been so focused on shielding his future, he'd almost forgotten why it mattered. That afternoon, he drove to a real estate office and put a down payment on a cozy ranch-style house 10 miles from town. 3 bedrooms, a big porch, and a yard for Emma's flowers. For you, he told her, handing over the keys. She teared up, swatting his arm. You little punk. I don't need this. But she moved in by spring, her nursery thriving nearby. PrairieTech took off too. By summer, Kyle had contracts with a dozen local shops, a feed store, a diner, even a mechanic, building websites and streamlining their sales. His team grew to 5, including a coder from tech he'd mentored. The money wasn't just a windfall anymore. It was a tool, proof he could rise above the past. He framed Jack's old ranch photo on his desk, a quiet nod to the man who'd set it all in motion. One last test came in July. A letter arrived, handwritten from Rick. I'm sorry, Kyle. Really. Lost the house, lost a lot. I was wrong about everything. Don't need your money. Just wanted you to know. No phone number, no return address. Kyle stared at it, the scrawl shaky and raw. Linda sent nothing, but a mutual friend mentioned she'd moved to Dallas, chasing a fresh start. He didn't reply, didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't his to give. It was theirs to earn, and they'd stopped trying long ago. Standing on Emma's new porch one evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, Kyle sipped a beer and watched fireflies blink across the yard. She joined him, rocking in a chair he'd built her. You did good, kid, she said, voice soft. He smiled, the weight of a decade lifting. Couldn't have without you. She snorted. Damn right. Rick and Linda faced their consequences, broke, alone, humbled by choices they couldn't outrun. Kyle didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His victory wasn't in their fall. It was in the life he'd built brick by brick with a family that mattered. I didn't win because I had money, he thought, staring at the stars. I won because I was stronger than their greed. And for the first time, he believed it.